capturing detail by drawing the overall effect of the detail rather than trying to draw precisely an accurate rendering of the detail obviously makes sense when it comes to things such as grass and leaves and gravel, where it's just impossible to draw the detail, and often we can really barely see it. Architecture is another great example of a subject where capturing the feel of the detail is sometimes, in fact often, a more realistic way to draw it rather than to actually draw the detail. And this facade, a facade of an inner courtyard in the Musee du Louvre, looking along the side of the clock pavilion in English. I won't upset anyone who knows French and try to say it any other way. Is a great example. Now you're watching this drawing at a combination of 4 times speed and double speed. When I'm drawing the effect of detail, which is about to happen, it will switch to double time. So if you slow it down to half speed, you'll actually be able to watch me draw it in real time. When I'm just basically establishing the perspective lines and the framework of the building, and I'm not doing the detail, that was fairly time consuming, and so that's the 4 times sped up part. This drawing took me just over 60 minutes to draw in real time though, and by having this two-way sped up approach, we've been able to get it down to 25 minutes. So we're now down to double time, drawing some of the detail in this closest part. Now, make sure you look carefully at the detail that I'm drawing, because the marks I'm using to capture the effect really won't make sense, and you really won't, I don't think, learn particularly much from them if you're not seeing the effect I'm trying to capture. And the most important thing with all of these figures is to not see them as figures. It's important to see them as basically shapes, that sometimes are shapes because that we see because of the values that they might capture the light and be a bit of a blank spot, or it could be a series of lines that angle in or away from a certain point. And with drapery, which is so often the case in these classical and neoclassical building sculptures, that's very common. So what I'm trying to do is I look at each figure, I position the head carefully, being careful not to draw it too large, and I put a mark where I think the waist is going to be, or perhaps a dot for the waist, a dot for where a knee or an elbow might come out, because I'm always looking for the furthest extremes of the sculptures, the key points, to make sure I get those in proportion for distance from each other. Because then when I, if you like, draw the connecting parts, depending on how the figure is bent or twisted, they're going to end up being in proportion. If I've got the head, the neck, the waist, the knees and the elbows in the right place. But very careful I don't start to draw figures, because, well, firstly, figures are not particularly easy to draw, but especially on this very small scale and at these extreme angles. You'll notice what I'm doing right now is I always actually draw the figure where we have these caryatids, these vertical figures that take the place of columns or of pilasters, as in this case. I make sure I draw the figure before I draw the architecture around it, because the figures protrude further from the building in most cases than any framing of windows or sides of buildings that are around them. And so to make sure I get that real three-dimensional punch in terms of what I draw, I need to make sure that I do those figures first so that I get that silhouette edge coming out. I get the knees or the chest or the elbows, or if the head's forward, I get that ahead of any lines that do need to sit behind it, because I am drawing directly in ink. There is no pencil underdrawing or marks here on my paper. The other important thing, of course, is while the focus on this is drawing the effect of the detail, particularly detail that we're seeing at quite an oblique angle, which makes it even more abstract in a way, it's still important that the perspective angles are correct. In fact, when we have oblique angles such as this, so very much side on, angled away from us, the angles are even more prominent. Therefore, they're often more extreme, and that can actually make it harder to draw them as extreme as they are. In this case, to have the upper sloping lines sloping down enough, but also to reduce the height of these horizontal bands as much as they get reduced from the left side of the building to the right-hand side. So have a look at what I'm doing again now. Capturing the effect of the architectural detail is not just for sculptures, not just for figures, it's for the decorative elements as well, and it's for the architectural detailing around things such as these windows. Now, you'll notice that I establish the closest detail first, and then I move along, then I move further away. And one of the important reasons for this is that whatever amount of detail I show for the closest, I need to show less as the figures move away. And it's easier to get that balance right if I do the closest first, and then I know that as I move further away, I need to make less and less detail apparent. I need to simplify things more and more and just capture the very main focus. Often just the hint of where there are shadows is the way this can happen. So now we're doing this circular pediment, broken circular pediment on the further part of the building. You'll notice I've switched from my 0.3mm pen to a 0.2. And that's so that I can capture the detail without it becoming too black, and also to give the feeling that it's further away. But I do need to make sure that having switched to a finer pen, I'm not actually trying to draw the same amount of detail, which may be possible with the finer pen. I still want to make sure I simplify what I'm doing. And again, for these further sections, have a good look at the reference as well as looking at what I'm drawing. Establishing some of the architecture now. With this, again, thinking not just the effective detail, but thinking of drawing it as a building, the foreshortening was the difficult thing to do. Not to let this building spread too far across the paper as I drew this long facade. And I would think if I were to get a ruler and measure this, it's not quite tight enough. I actually couldn't locate this drawing. I did this drawing a couple of years ago, so I couldn't find the original because I did want to have a better look at it. So I've had to just have a zoomed in version of the video. But here I go now establishing the architecture. I've switched back to my 0.3 because I'm firstly doing this closer section. And we have here another example of capturing the effect of the detail with this decorative ridge that sits up along the spine of the roofing. So I'm looking at the reference, I'm looking at the pattern and thinking generally what's the overall vibe we get when we look at it? What's the feeling of the pattern? It's this up and down sort of with a circular kind of rounded combo at this angle. If we were to look at this straight on, then quite possibly that detailing along the top of the roof there would have a more circular rather than a more rounded, angular, vertical feel, in which case I would have more circular lines in whatever lines I use to capture the effect. So we're always looking at what's happening from the angle we're seeing it at, and we have some more decorative details along the top here. And now we have this big ceiling, just speeding up again a bit while we establish the framework that the detail is going to go in. Now we have some large caryatids here, the major figures of this building as well as this facade, and they stand very tall. And again, I'm looking at how far they come out, where they come out. I look at the distance from the top of the head to the feet, standing on the base of whatever platforms they stand on, and then I'm working out in relation to the architecture, where are the waists? Where are the knees? And for each figure, I'm thinking, how is the fabric gathered or draping? Which knees protrude further than the others? Where are the elbows? Are there any arms upright? Are they all by the sides? And you'll notice with the figures, I also go from left to right. Because that also, well, not so much, in this case it's left to right, but it's from closest to furthest, because that does let me just make that very slight adjustment with detail and with the weight of my line as I move further away. So although these figures are larger, I'm not trying to draw them in more detail than the closer ones I've already drawn there on the left-hand side under that broken rounded pediment. But now we have a triangular pediment, and there are some more figures in that. We don't see them as clearly from this angle, and so I'm not sure if you looked closely at my figures, just drawn on a sheet of paper without any architecture around them. I don't think that you think they were figures, but I think they read as figures in the context of the architecture, and that's what we're after. We're after something where, in context, we can tell what it is straight away. And the irony, just as when we draw a tree, if we try and draw every leaf, it usually ends up looking not nearly as realistic as if we just try to capture the effect of all the leaves. If we just try to capture the effect of all the sculptures and we don't try and draw the actual sculptures, they look more real than if we do. Now, this approach, of course, wouldn't work if we were doing a detailed drawing of one marble figure. So we're talking about when there's a lot of detail, a lot of these decorative figures close together, often at odd angles and some distance away. But it really is a mindset trying to capture the effect of detail when we draw. It's a way, firstly, of observing the detail and then finding, when we look at it, what are the key elements to get accuracy and to capture the feel without getting bogged down in the detail. And as I said, if I start to think of elbows as elbows, then I start to draw arms, and then I find I come to grief very quickly. But if I'm looking at shapes and lines and angles and proportions and try to capture that feeling, try to approximate that, and particularly depending on the lighting and on the actual decoration, using shadows as much as I use lines, I find it's much easier. It's not nearly so hard. Now, capturing the effect of the detail, as I said, it's not just for the decorations and it's not just for the sculptures, but it's also for the actual architecture, because while this in general terms is a long wall moving along, it's also a lot of ins and outs. There's a lot of depth in this, a lot of big recesses where the large windows sit back. There are pilasters that come forward. There are columns that come forward. That center section comes forward. There are the two flanking sections on each side that come forward from, if you like, the baseline of the wall. And we need to capture all of those ins and outs, which means that we can't do lots of long angled lines at the start. I did fairly light lines so that over the top of that I can layer the lines slightly forward, slightly backwards as I need to. But again, it's quite complex, even though in some ways it's simple to look at. All of these different levels that go in and out horizontally, and also come in and out vertically, that capturing that, again, I'm not trying to draw all of the three-dimensional lines that we'd see if we zoomed into, say, that protruding corners. Instead, I'm trying to capture the feel that there's a lot of complexity in horizontal layers, thin layers stacked closely on top of each other, some that come towards us, some that go further back, and as they rise and go down, they do all sorts of different things. And some of them have other decoration on them, such as those little teeth things that we so often see in these sorts of buildings. So it is a real challenge to see that and to capture the effect. Now with this, particularly when I do the further section, just look to see how little detail I draw. It almost just finishes itself in the last 5 minutes, this drawing, in terms of the actual drawing, because I'm really just doing a series of vertical lines with just a few minor things to indicate that the various, well, let's call them undulations in the wall. And so because we've established, if you like, an assumption of what this front wall looks like, we don't need to draw much of it at all to, in inverted commas, see the same thing in the distance. So we're up to 4 times speed now, I think. Oh no, not for this part. This is still double speed. So please hit the like button if you're finding this interesting. If you're finding this helpful, that will help me. I really enjoyed drawing this. I like this sort of challenge, especially once you've done the closest detail, which is still, in my thinking, the most challenging to do, to hit that balance between not trying to draw it in detail and capturing the feel of it so that it looks right without being right. What we want is that our attention isn't drawn to any part, that the whole building flows with a feeling of reality. If we're drawn to a certain part, it's probably because something's not quite right, the perspective angles are out, or we've put too much detail, or just simply too much ink in the one area and unhappily created too dark a value. So I am switching my pen. You can see I've got the 0.2 again now because I'm a little bit further along. I'm just really using the 0.3 for that left-hand section, or the first 2 sections perhaps, and then 0.2 till I get to the far side of that center main part that has the clock in it, which we can't see from here. Well, we can't see from this angle. And then the 0.1 when I change back to a grey barreled pen. So the challenge here is now to just draw enough without drawing too much. Once we go past the immediate vicinity of the front of the scene, less is more. So it's better that we draw less and then we reluctantly add a few more lines if we think it really needs strengthening for some reason. Now, if we have a look at our reference again, you'll notice along the top where the pilasters end and come up under the architrave, the horizontal banding that sits on top of the columns, we tend not to notice the individual columns and their capitals so much as just get this feeling that there's this line of kind of knobbly bits that catch the sun or cast shadows all in a straight line that becomes smaller and smaller and narrower together as they move along. So that's the effect I'm trying to capture when I'm doing those parts in life, in my drawing. I'm not trying to draw little Corinthian capitals. I'm trying to capture the feel that there's some little fussy thing that catches light and casts shadows that's appropriate for the size I'm drawing it at the distance I'm seeing it from. I took this photo from an upper window, obviously. Didn't actually go down into this courtyard at ground level, though that is something I may well do on another trip if I'm able to get there. So it's at this stage it's becoming quite simple. Now have a zoom into what I've just done there and see how much little I've drawn to create the feeling that we're looking at the same thing as those underneath those 2 rounded pediments that are much closer to us. Now we're just doing this little right-hand section of another arm of the courtyard. I think this section was built, in the 1500s. It's one of the earlier parts of the Louvre that we can see today. Again, if you haven't hit the like button, please, why not do that for me? Do you consciously apply the technique of drawing the effect of the detail to architectural decorations, or have you more used it for nature? I'd love to hear in the comments, but I can't see how I could draw this sort of architecture without applying the technique to the decorative elements. So a lot of it at this distance now is more shadows than anything else, because it's a bit hard to see the decoration that's in full sunlight and doesn't cast any shadows. So, great subject to draw, a lot of fun in drawing it. Why don't you have a go? I'll post this photo, if I can find it, on my channel community page, so it might take me a day or two to find the reference, because it was some time ago that I was working with this photo. But perhaps by the time you see this video, it's posted, so if you're interested in having a go drawing this, or in just drawing a part of it, why not? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this interesting, and I hope it extends your understanding of this technique of drawing the effect of detail, not the detail. But whatever you do, however you use it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.